Okay, so topic 3 today, and before we start kind of going through some slides, let's talk about our 4 main goals that I want to teach you, and if you'd like to, write in the reflection right as we go through it, right? Great idea. Okay, so number 1, we're going to talk about how to use something called a Punnett square, and it helps you to figure out the likelihood of getting inherited characteristics. Okay, you're going to see a Punnett square right away here. I'm going to show you a picture of one there. This is a Punnett square. You can see it. It's a square. We'll talk about how it works. Okay. Next thing we're going to do is we're going to talk about why variation within species is so important. And we've already alluded to this a little bit, but it is a good thing that you all look differently. For one, I can actually know your names, because if you were all identical twins of each other, how would I know what to call you? You'd all look the exact same. But it's good that some of you are tall and some of you are short and some of you have red hair and some of you have glasses, and, right? Like, that is actually a really healthy thing. So we want to talk about why variation is so important. And one of the reasons why is actually going to be the next topic on here. We're going to talk about a term called natural selection. And maybe you've heard this before. It's often coined as this phrase, survival of the fittest. Maybe you've heard that before. And these two things really go together. And then finally, we're going to talk about how when we discuss inheritance and variation and the fact that like you get your characteristics from your parents, there's actually 2 different categories of characteristics. One is called discrete and one is called continuous. And we'll talk about that vocabulary when the time comes. So I'm just going to hit one set of lights here and we'll get started. So, quick recap of what we've discussed up till now. Offspring, obviously, come from the combination of information from parents, right? The terminology we use is the zygote comes, but here's the important thing is that you have 2 copies of each chromosome because one came from mom, one came from dad, which means it's almost like you're ready to go into the kitchen and you're ready to go make some food. Let's say that you want to bake cookies. And mom gave you a recipe to bake cookies, and dad gave you a recipe to bake cookies. Mom's recipe calls for chocolate chip cookies. Dad's recipe calls for oatmeal raisin cookies. And you've been now given 2 recipes. What do you do? Who do you listen to, mom or dad, right? Now, or you can, well, actually, that is an option as well. Actually, we'll talk about that. Sometimes your genes will actually say, screw it, I'm not going with A or B, I'm doing my own thing, right? And that's also possible. Okay, but let's just discuss the terminology again one more time here. Here is a good picture that I found online. Here's a chromosome that you got from, say, your mom. Here is a chromosome that you got from, say, your dad. And this would be the locus where the gene for eye color shows up. Now, let's just pretend that the colors are what they are. So from mom, you got the gene for red eyes. I know that's not usually a thing, but let's just go with it, hey? And from dad, you got the gene for green eyes. Well, does that make sense though? Like, I'm just saying how like the colors are different here, right? So for mom and dad, you have 2 different genes. We have competing recipes, right? And so what I wrote down here is that even if the trait would be like a way of describing, well, I have red eyes, I have green eyes, I have brown hair. Whatever trait you get from that gene, even if they don't present, you still have that gene, right? So let's say that we say that mom's eye color wins out. This is the one you have. You are a carrier of dad's genetic information still, right? I'm going to close the door real quick. And my wife and I, we had a daughter, 3 years ago almost. Her name's Cadence, and she has red hair, and we were blown away by that because everyone in my family basically has brown hair. Everyone in my wife's family basically has brown hair, and then we had a red-headed child, right? What that has to imply is that I had a hidden red-haired gene from one of my parents that was, we call it recessive. And my wife also had a hidden gene that was recessive. And it just so happened that the way that the genes mixed in with that particular, my third daughter, is that red hair is the one that ended up showing up, right? That's what I want to show right here, is that you actually have a trait that's not showing, perhaps, that you have the ability to pass on to offspring. Okay? And one of the ways that we do this, sorry, I'm right in your way, aren't I, Afro? How's that? Is that better? That's got to be better. Okay, so this is a good way of trying to show visually a way of representing how that might look. Okay, imagine that big R, say, stands for brown hair. Okay, so this big R stands for brown. And the little r, let's make that stand for red hair. Okay. The way that dominance works is that brown wins out. Okay. So my dad, for example, because I can use me as an example. Actually, no, let's use this as me. This is me. Okay, this is Chris. Right here. I had two genes for hair color. I got one from my mom, so this would be from Chris's mom. Chris's mom. My mom gave me a brown gene for hair color. Chris's dad gave me a gene for red hair color, actually. What hair color do I have? Brown. Why do I have brown hair? Well, because brown hair is dominant. So remember that example I gave you about mom and dad giving you two recipes? Well, you kind of got to choose which one you're going to go with, and if there is a dominant recipe, chocolate chip, obviously, then that's the one you go with, right? And in this example, it's brown, right? So therefore, I have brown hair. But I had a hidden red gene, okay? Same logic here. This is my wife. Her name's Melissa. Melissa. And Melissa from, say, her dad. So Melissa's dad gave her a brown gene. Melissa's mom gave her a red gene. So what color is Melissa's hair? Brown. Because who wins in the brown-red fight? Brown. Brown's dominant. Okay, now here's how this works out. This is about probability, is then Melissa and I then had children. Okay. Now, we have no idea which of our chromosomes will match, right? Because remember, I have 46, right? But sperm cells and egg cells as well, right? You only get half. And so I don't know which sperm cells took which half, right? But it's basically a 50-50 probability as to whether or not I passed on the brown gene or the red gene, right? And so that's what this right here really means, is there's a 50-50 shot of my cells passing on brown or red. And by that same logic, there was a 50-50 shot of Melissa passing on a brown or red. And so using this square right here, we can kind of write out all the possibilities. If I passed on brown and Melissa passed on brown, it would be brown-brown. Okay, well that's like mom giving you the chocolate chip cookie recipe and dad giving you the chocolate chip cookie recipe. Which one are you making? Doesn't really matter. It's got to be brown. Right? There's a possibility that I passed on that hidden red gene while Melissa passed on the brown gene. So can you kind of see how these ones kind of combine? Well, in this case right here, there's a brown with a red. But what we know is that dominance wins, so brown shows up. I could have passed on a brown gene. Melissa could have passed on a red gene. Again, remember, it's like random. It's 50-50, we believe. So based on that, then brown with red, well, brown wins. But 1 in every 4 times, effectively, I could have passed on the red gene. That was the one I wasn't using. Melissa could have passed on the red gene, the one that she wasn't using. And then you end up getting 2 red genes. Well, now there's not a dominant one to take over, and so this is, well, you're getting oatmeal raisin, you're getting oatmeal raisin, well, I guess we're going with oatmeal raisin. And so this explains why Melissa and I apparently have a 25% chance of us having in our next child is 25% chance of having red hair. And we didn't even realize that because the gene was always, it was hidden. The word we use for that is recessive. So if that concept makes sense, that's fantastic. We can keep working on it, okay? Like it takes a little while to visualize and kind of understand how the math behind it works. So I'll show you some more Punnett squares in a bit. Let's move on though. Let's talk about terminology. Okay, I need to get a drink here, so I'm gonna walk and move. If you have 2 genes that are the same as each other, for example, say dad gives you red and mom gives you red. Or dad gives you chocolate chip cookie recipe and mom gives you chocolate chip cookie recipe. We call it a purebred. Fair enough? You've probably heard this before. We talk about it with dogs. Anybody have a purebred dog? Fair enough. Okay, so what does that mean to you when it's purebred? What do you know about that? Do you mind sharing? Exactly. That's exactly it. Thank you, by the way. Yeah, so it means that like it's not a mixture of breeds, right? And if you go back in the lineage, there was only ever Great Danes that were its grandparents, right? I like to joke that I am a purebred Dutchman. because my dad was Dutch, my mom was Dutch, my grandparents were all Dutch. You know, everybody in my lineage basically came from Holland. That's where the last name Schalke comes from, right? But a hybrid is where you have some of each, right? Where like your mom and dad characteristics are slightly different. And so in this picture right here, a mixed breed will have characteristics of both sides of the family. Right? If I go back right here, this right here would be a purebred because it's red, red. This right here would also be a purebred because it's, oh, sorry, this was brown, brown. This will be red, red, right? But these two right here are your hybrids because they have one from mom, one from dad, right? Something has to be dominant, but there's a mix. Does that make sense? So here's the slide that I use then to discuss that terminology again. It's all based on whether there's something dominant or recessive. Something wins. Blue beats brown. Red beats orange. Attached earlobes beat detached earlobes. The ability to roll your tongue beats the ability to not roll your tongue, right? Like there are so many traits in your body, and one of them is dominant. And I think I like this picture right here to talk about that allele concept again here. Here's that word locus. It is the location on the gene where the gene is found. And whoever asked that question about, I forget the word already, but like the distance between these genes was that word that you used. Forget what it was though. But here you can see that there could be the allele for short hair, or you could have an allele for long hair. Do you see how though it's still in the gene for hair, right? And right next to, in the gene for hair, the allele for hair, there's also the allele for having white fur versus black fur. And one of this came from mom and one came from dad. So you've always got this clash of which one? Whoops, I didn't mean to. I wanted to circle that. Which one wins? Am I making my point, hopefully? So let's do some more practice on these Punnett squares. And of course the examples are missing again. Dang it. Okay, I gotta reboot the software. Give me a sec. I don't know why this glitch happens. Don't save the changes. It's okay, I need water anyways. Okay. There's this glitch my computer does where sometimes it won't make pictures show up. I don't know why. Okay, let's try this example. I'm going to go sit at the back of the class here so I can see face on better. Okay. Let's say that we were breeding cats. Okay. You have a white cat for mom, and you have a black cat for dad. And why don't we just label the genes as W for white and B for black. Does that work? Just as a number? And what the general consensus is when you're doing this is you use a capital letter for something that's dominant. And so I tried to write a capital B. I even did it instinctively. I didn't even think about it. I just did it. But here's why I know that black must be dominant. Look at all the kids. All of the offspring were black. Black must be the dominant gene, right? And so if I'm working backwards trying to figure out what the genome was from the mom and the dad to get there, here's how this might have looked, is that the only way mom could be white is if it was white with white. That's the only way for mom to actually express the white color, because if mom had a black coat on it, then it would have been black. Does that make sense? So on this side over here of what we call the Punnett square, you'd write white, white. Mom has two possible genes she could pass, but they're both white. Okay. Dad, on the other hand, could either have been black, black or black, white, because those are both combinations that would have let dad become black. That being said, if all of the kids here were black, it probably was black, black, because here's how this would have looked then in the Punnett square. This black could have met up with this white, but that means that this cat would be black. Or this black could have met up with this white, but that means that this cat would be black. Or this black could meet up with this white, but that means this cat is black, and this black. Do you kind of see how this works right here? And so I can hopefully go backwards and say that I think these were both purebreds. This was a purebred white cat, which passed down two white genes. This was a purebred black cat, which passed down two black genes, but it doesn't really matter because if dad is always passing down a black, I guarantee you that every single one of these genes will have at least a black, and black wins. Let's try another example to compare. Now let's try a black cat and a black cat, and like surprisingly, they end up getting a white cat. Like, consider the thought of this one right here. You have a white and a black cat, and you'd be like, oh cool, they're all black. That made sense, right? This is the one that surprises people. Mom has black fur, dad has black fur, and one of your kids comes out different looking than you. This is that recessive trick. Here's how this must have looked. Is mom must have been black with white, but black wins, right? Dad must have been black with white, but black wins. When you put that on the side of the Punnett square here, black, white, and black, white, then you kind of like, you make a grid out of it. Black with black, BB, that's this cat right here. This is a purebred. It has both dominant traits. But then B goes with W. See, I'm taking this B with this W here. But black wins over white. So this cat's black. And this black and this white could go together. But again, black with white, well, black wins. But there's that 1 in 4 chance that white with white could show up. And that's why one of your kittens has white fur. So this is our first thing on the list of things to understand. And this may be one of the first topics that we're doing in Science 9 where it's more of an application. This isn't like just memorize information. Up till now, I could probably tell you just memorize what a zygote is. Just memorize what an allele means. This is a bit more challenging, right? Which is okay. I mean, that's why we're doing the no grades thing, hopefully, to try to help you with this. But there's been more of an application to it. So I'm going to challenge you to try to write down on your reflection what you understand about how to use this Punnett square to figure out likelihood. There is a 75% chance then, 3 out of 4, that a kitten will be black in this scenario. And there is a 25% chance that a kitten will be white in this scenario. And that's exactly where my wife and I are when it comes to our daughters and their hair. Or maybe a son. I could have a son. I have 3 girls, by the way. So help me when they're teenagers. I'm being silly. Here's another picture of how that works. Father's genes and mother's genes, right? So in this scenario here, if capital B is dominant, dad is basically a mixture, a hybrid. Mom is purebred. And with the way that things work out here, there is a 50% chance, right? Because 2 of them, you'd have a dominant gene. And then there's a 50% chance that it'll be the other color. So it's a good visual to help make predictions. Okay. And here's one more to kind of illustrate the concept. You can even do it with eye color. Brown and blue eye colors also fit into this category. Okay. So if you have brown, brown, and blue, blue, well, since brown is dominant, if you get a capital B in each of these scenarios here, it doesn't matter. Your kid is having brown eyes. But if you're brown with the recessive trait, and there's a purebred blue, which there has to be, by the way, right? Blue would have to be 2 recessive genes. It's the only way it would show up. Then it is possible that 50% of the time you get blue and 50% you get brown, which is why some of you may have parents who have brown eyes and you have blue eyes, or vice versa. So, okay, moving on though. Here's a question off an old PAT that basically tests this concept. You guys know you read PAT, right? I can't solve that problem, right? Even though we're not going to do our grades thing over the course of the year, that is one thing that just, it has to happen. I don't get a choice. So, I mean, let's practice a question. This came off an old PAT. A man and a woman who both have brown hair have 3 kids. 2 of their kids had brown hair, but 1 got blonde. And so we know that brown hair is dominant. We know that blonde hair then must be recessive. It didn't say it here, recessive. So then the question is, well, what's the combination that would make it so that 2 brown-haired people end up with a blonde-haired child? Right. And the correct answer would be this one right here. Big B, little b, big B, little b. Right. This first one is wrong because this is 2 blonde-haired people. That doesn't work. That would never work. And this is dominant brown with dominant brown. There's not even a recessive gene in the bloodline. It's not possible for these people here at all to have blonde children, right? They're purebreds. This one right here, the other option right here though, dad is always giving a dominant gene, always, right? If you got capital B and capital B, dad is 100% of the time giving a dominant gene. So there's no way for a recessive gene to show, so the only possibility is the middle one here, B. Yeah?
I got my dad's hair color.
Yep.
Corey got my mom's hair color. She's blonde. You all have different hair types. How does that work?
Great question. Let's move on to our next slide. Okay, what I just showed you there is not actually 100% true in all cases. It's a very simplified version of things. Yeah. Okay. There are some traits that don't work that way. There are some traits that are very dominant recessive. Okay. And inheritance is very typical, and you can make with 100% certainty what's going on. But let's be honest, humans are a little more complex than just like one or the other. For example, there aren't only two colors of hair, right? There are many colors of hair and eye color, right? There are certain things where there really are only two options, but there are some things where there are many options. And so there is something called incomplete dominance, which I think is maybe what you might be asking about here. Is it's actually possible, and this picture right here is pretty cool, for a snapdragon to have red flowers, and I think red is hidden over here. You can also have white flowers over here, and when those genes mix, you get pink flowers. And the picture I found had yellow on it as well. But like the rules that I gave you are not 100% firm rules in all cases. Does that help answer your question? Yeah. So the word we use for that is called incomplete dominance, where neither trait is really dominant nor recessive, and you can actually mix colors, right? And doesn't that make total logical sense? If you have red and you have white and you blur the two of them together, wouldn't pink be kind of logical sometimes too? So yeah, I mean, the stuff I just showed you is only applicable in like cases where like it's well, this is the word we'd use, dominant recessive patterns. If it fits that exact type, then sure. But yeah, there are exceptions, people, for sure. Okay, and because of that, here's our next topic. We need variation. We don't want to even just have two options. If we only had two options for everything, blue or brown eyes, or take skin color, if we only had two distinct types of skin color, or hair color, or then our world would be very, very limited in this word right here, variation. And we want variation. Variation is so important. Otherwise, I'm just going to read right off of here. All species would have the exact same traits, they would look like each other, and there would be no differences. Right? If you all looked exactly the same as each other, that would be hard. I wouldn't know your names, right? Even as it is, I'm struggling with your names, right? Now, let's say that everything in the world was dominant recessive. There would still only be two options. That would still really be a problem, right? So variation is important, and here's the reason why. Environments change. Our world does not stay the way that it is. For example, what if there's a new predator? The coronavirus is a really big example of this currently. What if there's a new disease? What if there's a toxic substance? What if you eliminate a food source? If you make one small change to your niche, you guys remember the word niche? We used it in our notes a few days back. A niche is like the places you go, the things you eat, the stuff you do. That's your niche, right? A niche is like, what do you eat? Where do you go? Who do you talk to? What do you breathe, right? That's your niche, all the stuff that you do. If you make a change in that, and there is only one trait available, this is the key word. The entire species could undergo extinction. Okay? And I gave the silly example yesterday, but let's say that there's a new disease that comes out that kills everyone with blue eyes. Shoot, that sucks, because that's me. That's why I used that one, right? I don't hope this happens. You guys get this as a hypothetical, right? But the good news is the human race would survive because not everybody in the world has blue eyes, right? And that's important. And I got a really great picture here to help illustrate this. The snowshoe hare is a good example. Bunny rabbits. This bunny right here in the wintertime right now has a huge advantage against its predators because it's got a white coat. It blends into its environment. That is very advantageous for it. Whereas, unfortunately, this bunny right here with the brown hair is, yeah, sorry, buddy. It's not good for him during the winter months. It is easy to spot. A predator will likely find it, right? However, I don't have an opposite version, but let's say it's summertime out. Now it's the opposite. Now, in the summertime, white bunny is a lot easier to find than brown bunny. And so that variation is vital to the continuation of bunny bloodlines. Because if all the bunnies were white and they all got killed during the summer months, well, then there'd be no bunnies left. Or if all of the bunnies were brown and they all got killed during the winter months, then the species would go extinct. But because of the variety, the species will continue. It has to, right? Because each of these bunnies has the adaptation to survive. And we have a name for that. Charles Darwin, we'll talk about him a little later in the course as well. Charles Darwin came up with a theory called natural selection, which is basically described by the word survival of the fittest. It basically means that there are certain characteristics that are good characteristics to have. For example, being a white bunny and living in northern Canada, that's good. Yep, want that. And if you happen to be that one rare bunny that gets the recessive trait, and all of a sudden you live in northern Canada where it snows all the time, and you happen to be born a brown bunny, crap, that sucks, doesn't it? Right? And that could happen because there's that 1 in 4 chance maybe that something could be born with a different hair color, right? Well, survival of the fittest basically says that there are heritable characteristics that are just, they are conducive to the environment. And I want to introduce to you a case study of actually how humans may be actually subverting and getting around a heritable characteristic. And it's actually allowing us to survive more. My wife, I'll talk about her lots, obviously, being my wife. She works on the labor and delivery floor at the hospital. And so this is actually her job, is to help deliver babies. And what we've discovered is that sometimes babies are able to come out vaginally. They're born naturally. Okay, not trying to get too deep into how that happens. But there's another way that babies can be born. It's through something called a cesarean. It's called a C-section. Maybe many of you know that you maybe were born via C-section. I was. Right? Even back in the 80s, that was a common thing. Anyways, of the two methods that babies are usually born, either a cesarean, which is where they literally cut open a woman's abdomen and retrieve, I guess, they cut in order to get to the baby, or the baby comes out the birth canal. What's changed, though, is that there's more and more C-sections. It used to be 100 years ago that women died in childbirth, right? That was actually a very common thing, is that a mom and a baby might not survive. In general, because maybe a baby didn't present very well and tried to come out feet first or butt first rather than head first. But now, as medical technology has advanced, now we can have C-sections. And I can share my own personal story about this. My second daughter, Cameron, she was born by a C-section because when she was trying to come out of Melissa, she was facing the wrong direction. And Melissa tried to have a normal delivery as much as possible, and eventually the doctor said, Melissa, this isn't going to work. We need to have a C-section. But I'm very happy for that, because chances are, if we lived 100 years ago, one of three things probably would have happened. Option number one, in order to have my daughter come out of my wife, we probably would have had to crush her skull. That was actually a common thing, was that you actually had to, unfortunately, kill your baby, crush the skull, because if a baby does not come out of a mom and doesn't fit, the baby keeps growing. And that's not healthy for mom after a certain point, because that's option two. Maybe mom would die as well, right? And so 100 years ago, 200 years ago, it wasn't uncommon for females to die during childbirth. Or if you tried to save the mom, you had to crush the skull of the baby to literally rip the baby out, to be like, well, if it's not coming, we got to get it out either way. That sucks, eh? Fortunately, we now have a third option. We have cesareans, where we can actually cut open the abdomen, go into the uterus, and be able to retrieve a baby, right? Now, here's what that has to do with human evolution, though. It used to be that if a woman had, say, a very narrow pelvis, and the pelvis was too narrow for a baby's skull to fit through, well, those women wouldn't make it, unfortunately. Sorry, this is very morbid, isn't it? But those women wouldn't survive childbirth. Or if they did survive childbirth, they wouldn't have many children, and so therefore the narrow hips gene would not get passed on. But now we have more cesareans, which means that in a case where normally a baby and a mom might have died, well, now we can save them. But now what does that do? Well, it means that they pass on the narrow hips gene, and so therefore more and more people have the narrow hips gene, which then makes it hard for them to naturally have a baby, which then means that there's more and more C-sections. Do you guys see how that works there? and that would be a great example of natural selection. Now, we don't want that. We don't want people dead, right? So I think no one is advocating that we'd stop doing C-sections. But anyways, very, very interesting topic. Okay, I have 10 minutes. I got to get finished here. Now, another thing we got to talk about, though, is that I've been describing to you characteristics that we would call discrete. And not everything is discrete. Not everything is red or black. There was that incomplete dominance idea of mixtures. And so there are some characteristics that are what we call continuous, meaning there's a range. Okay? For example, here are some things that are discrete. Peas, by the way, are a great example of a type of plant that we can talk about discrete characteristics. A pea is either round or wrinkled. There's no in between. It's one or the other. It's green or yellow. It's full or pinched. But what about tall or short? Like, tall and short is kind of a range. There's a spectrum of things, right? Where it's like there's like an in-between. And if you have traits that there's a spectrum to, you'd call that continuous. And so, to be honest, when we were talking about blonde and brown and red hair color, I am kind of simplifying things because there's a spectrum, right? There's not literally just brown. There's shades of brown. There's shades of red. You know what I mean? My wife actually has a little bit of red in her hair during the summer months. For some reason, just the red tinge in her hair seems to show up a little bit more. There's a spectrum, right? And is this my last slide? Yeah, okay. So I want to spend a little more time talking about this. I need you to know that vocabulary, right? There are certain things that are literally, it's A or B. It's one or the other, okay? Let's go that direction. We have enough time. This one's a very challenging topic now in the 21st century. Gender. I don't want to open too much of a can of worms here. That's not my goal here. Biologically, there is an X and a Y chromosome, right? And that's really the two options that you have, right? And so when a male passes on genetic information, they have X chromosome. No, sorry, females have X. My bad. Females will have what we call the two X chromosomes, and males will have an XY, right? And those are the two options, right? And so in terms of the genes, in terms of that, okay, because I'm not trying to, hopefully you guys understand where I'm trying to go here. I'm not trying to deny gender spectrum in terms of where those sorts of things go. But in terms of genes and alleles are very specific. You either have an X or you have a Y, right? Now, how that represents, maybe we can start to talk about that in complete dominance spectrum right here. But that would be a great example of there's either a capital B or a small b, right? How that manifests itself, we can talk about that a little bit differently. But there are some things. Does that make sense how I'm phrasing this? I want to tread really lightly because I don't want to make this controversial. But there are some things that are very clearly, it's either A or B. And there are some things where, well, there's A, there's B, there's C, there's D, there's E. But not only that, there are shades of A, and there are shades of B, and there are shades of C. Does that make sense? And so that's the vocabulary we use. Continuous, a range, and discrete, where it's one or the other. So, does that make sense then that short and tall has to be a range? Right? Like, there's definitely a range there. And I would say that color, there's got to be a range of color as well, right? You can be white with a little bit of pink, but for example, I think round and wrinkled, this would be best described as discrete. Either it's perfectly round, or there's some wrinkling on it, right? Now, it could be really wrinkled, it could be some, but you can definitely make this A versus B, or X versus Y, however it is you want to describe that. Is that fair? Okay. Last slide here. Now, traits can be affected by the environment, though. Okay? For example, this one's tough because I don't mean to, again, open cans of worms that are meant to shame or to be controversial, but weight is a good example here because there's evidence that weight is affected by both nature and nurture. Weight is affected by your genes, but diet and exercise do have a role to play, right? And that's where there really is no one answer, right? There are some people that are going to be naturally slender or naturally, if I can say it hopefully in a nice enough way, naturally more obese, right? There are genetic materials to that, right? But diet and exercise do have an effect on where in that spectrum things are, right? And so it's not like it's big or small, or slim and obese, or underweight or overweight, however you want to describe that, right? Like there are other factors to play into genetics. And that's what scientists are always trying to figure out more of, is what other factors are there. For example, one that we should discuss is the presence of alcohol in the bloodstream. Most everybody nowadays has had the education to know that women shouldn't drink when pregnant. It causes FAS or FASD, whichever acronym I think is most recent, fetal alcohol syndrome. And we recognize that it causes birth defects, it causes neurodevelopment issues, right? And so there's a nature and there's a nurture. Right? And to what degree do each affect? We're still figuring that out. Right? And that's what makes biology kind of a cool science, is that even if I can go back to the topic I wanted to broach, hopefully very tactfully right here, the male-female stuff there, we're still learning about that. We're still trying to figure out how does that manifest, how does that work, right? When we recognize that there's an X and there's a Y. There are some genetic conditions where you can have an XXY, actually, where someone can actually have two sets of gender expressions represented at once. Right, and so then the question is, well, how does that work, right? So, still studying those things. All right, cool. Let's wrap things up here. So, like I always am trying to do here, at the end of the lesson, then 2 things that I want you to try. Topic 3, if you go to this, here's the 4 things we discussed. So hopefully you feel like you have knowledge of this. How's that Punnett square work? Why do we want that variation? What's this natural selection thing? And can you tell me now discrete and continuous? Because, to be honest, I've been cheating. All of the lessons are about discrete, right? One or the other. But in real life, there's a spectrum, right? So, anyways, answer that. And then the other thing for you to try, and we'll go over this tomorrow before our activity, is there's the lesson. I'm going to pop a new YouTube video in here for the 2020 version. And then there's some practice questions. So I'll do one with you, and then you got the other 4. Sound good? So here's number 1. There's a female cat with white fur, a male cat with black fur, and they produce 3 black kittens. So far, so good. White fur, black fur, 3 black kittens. What does the 3 black kittens tell you? What's dominant? Probably black, yeah. So white fur color is got to be recessive, so it's one of these 2. And if the 2 cats described above had a 4th kitten, it's probably going to be black. Now, that being said, that's based on like our very, very simplified versions of things, because there is something called incomplete dominance. In theory, it could be gray, but for the purpose of this course, we're going to talk dominant recessive stuff to keep it simple, right? Because there is an exception to everything, right? Which is why you get that thing like that Kleinhauser syndrome, where someone gets 47 chromosomes, right? Sometimes something, we don't know why, we're still figuring it out, but sometimes something doesn't happen the way we'd expect. And it causes things to be slightly outside of what the expected predictions are, right? But chances are this one should be recessive with black. We'll just check the answer, and then yeah, correct. Recessive is because black was dominant, and that means there will be black offspring. It has to be black. So, okie dokie. Sound good? Everybody know what you need to work on? So, read a reflection, do the 5 practice questions. We'll go over this tomorrow. And tomorrow when you come in, chances are I'll have rearranged the desks, just so you're aware, because we're going to do an activity together. So the desks will probably be in pods of 6 or 4, something like that. I might even make some different sizes. Feel free to find people that you'd like to work with, because you kind of need to work with somebody. So I'll let you guys kind of choose how you'd like to do that, and if we need to shuffle a desk here or there, we can. But that's the plan for tomorrow, is we're going to do an activity to help us work on diversity. So, sound good, everybody? Thanks, everybody. You guys can take off as soon as the bell goes. See how good I timed it today.